It is my great pleasure to welcome you today to the beginning of a two-day conference to celebrate one Michael Fishbane, Professor Michael Fishbane, better known as Buzzy. First of all, I just want to make some thank yous, and then I'll move into the beginning of our two-day celebration of your career at Chicago. Thank you to Sarah Bigger, who has been at the mastermind in the background of all of this, Suzanne Riggle, who stepped up significantly today to help in preparing it, as did her husband Jason. Irema, who's been working with Eitan and Alicia and others throughout the process, and Art, Brittany, and Truth and Documentary, who are preparing all the audio-visual for this event, which will once again go up onto YouTube. I want to also welcome all the people that I haven't seen in many years. It's so nice to see so many faces appearing once again to be involved in this event. And thank you most of all to Buzzy, to Professor Fishbane. He knows, you may not know, that he resisted a retirement event for several years. When I finally convinced him, and I will take credit for that and nothing else, when I finally convinced him, he did embrace it fully, as you can tell by the wonderful event that will unfold before you the next few days. So thank you, Buzzy, most of all, and thank you for the wonderful work you've been doing, and thank you for his sidekick, his last PhD student, maybe, Sam Schoenkoff. There have been others after, perhaps, but Sam Schoenkoff sitting innocently to the side. Sam worked with Buzzy and with all of us to help put together this program, so thanks also to Sam. Just a few remarks to get things going before I hand it over to my colleague Ken Moss, who's the director of the Greenwood Center for Jewish Studies, co-sponsor of this event. Michael Fishbane, Buzzy, is someone who you all know very well, and I won't go through your CV to illustrate and illuminate all the different achievements through your life. I'll just say that it is an extraordinary scholar, an extraordinary person who can move so easily between so many different fields and disciplines. From your original scholarship in Bible, which transformed and changed the field with the focus on interbiblical exegesis, to the massive Song of Songs Rabbah and Midrash project that opened up rabbinic sources in a new way, to all the work you do in the Middle Ages, from Zohar to other Kabbalistic sources, even Rambam, even Maimonides, especially 351, but not only. The Kiss of God, of course, will never be understood the same after your readings of it. From there to Kabbalah Tzfat, of course, Chassidut, and modern Jewish thought, extending from the more mystically inclined like Heschel to Buber, Rosenzweig, and others, to his own theology. And I think it is one of the most courageous things you can experience in a scholar, something I have not yet learned, to shift from they to I. And over the last 10 years, Buzzy, as you all know, has shifted a focus on theology and really created a field that didn't exist, Jewish theology. And that shift from I is quite extraordinary, from saying what the rabbis meant and what the rabbis say to what I believe, in light of all these sources, in a contemporary moment and into the future. And his two theology books, well known and extremely influential, are really a new moment in the development of Jewish thought in our own time. Buzzy, you may also know, or you may not know, is a wonderful mentor for me. I arrived in 2003, and I remember very clearly having dinner with you at Shallot's when it was downtown, a kosher restaurant. Shallot's. You may not remember, I remember every moment. And of course, you mentored me throughout my junior years as assistant professor and continuing forward. We've been a colleague, we were a colleague, and we continue to be colleagues throughout the 20 years of the History of Judaism program, and of course you are a good friend. I will never forget, especially one moment at Buzzy's house with Mona and Eitan. I don't think you were there, Alicia, with your mother there when your mother revealed the true meaning of the name Buzzy, the origin. She provided us with the origin story, which I will allow you to repeat. I will not repeat the story. It does have to do with bumblebees, I do believe, but I will say no more. So really, a great scholar, a great teacher, a great mentor, a great colleague, and a friend. And it is my pleasure, it was my honor to introduce this event celebrating you, celebrating your scholarship, celebrating your family, and involving so many students who will share their experiences of learning with you and growing with you. Thank you very much, and welcome for a day tonight and a night and tomorrow that will be quite illuminating.
As director of the Joyce Z. and Jacob Greenberg Center for Jewish Studies, it's my privilege to add a few words of welcome at this immensely important occasion. Welcome to all the scholars and guests assembled here and welcome, of course, to the great scholar whose work you're here to celebrate, whose work you're here to comment upon and elaborate, Professor Michael Fishbane, Professor Emeritus of Jewish Studies at the Divinity School here at the University of Chicago. Many of the assembled here, perhaps all of them, know Professor Fishbane's work even more intimately than I've had a chance to do. And I'll only add two things, one institutional and one personal pedagogical. First, since my arrival here some 2 months and 3 years ago, I've come to understand from many people here much longer than I, that the project of Jewish studies at the University of Chicago, whatever has been achieved in that field and whatever may yet be achieved, is really unimaginable without Professor Fishbane's years of work and creativity. As director of the Greenberg Center, I thus think of myself, as do all its directors, as an heir to something essential and precious and a responsibility. On a personal pedagogical note, if you go, and I must admit I did this amongst many other sources, if you go to the Wikipedia page for Professor Fishbane, you will find a bibliography of his extraordinary work, which I'm sure everyone here knows quite intimately, ranging from Garments of Torah, The Kiss of God, The Exegetical Imagination, all the way through Fragile Finitude. And it's an extraordinary list. But at least one great book is missing from that list, and that is Judaism, Revelation, Traditions, and the Religions, Traditions of the World series, published originally in 1988. It may simply be that amidst these extraordinary monographs and commentaries on that listing, it didn't seem sensible to ever put it together to include something seemingly slight or popular or pedagogical in intent. But I want to note that ever since the woman who's now my wife and colleague, Ann Aiken-Moss, introduced me to this book in the early 90s, which she read in an undergraduate class in East European Jewish History with Jay Harris, I've returned to it repeatedly in my own teaching from the very get-go as a teacher of modern Jewish history. And it remains, I think, the very best short introduction to Judaism available in English in so many ways, and in its own quiet way, it's a testament to Professor Fishbane's truly extraordinary reach of knowledge and understanding. Before I close, I must add, speaking not in the name of the center or anyone's name, but only in my own name, that I worry that it will be hard for me to turn my full attention to scholarship that is above all a celebration of Jewish and human creativity at a moment when it feels impossible to celebrate anything, at a moment when so much thought and feeling, grief, despair, and desperate hope are straining toward family, friends, and communities in Israel and Palestine. I allow myself to imagine that many of you share my feelings and my worry. I won't try to make any trite leaps between this desperate situation and Professor Fishbane's work, but I will allow myself to say that if some sort of scholarship on the religious and interpretive impulse in the Jewish tradition can remain undimmed in significance, even in such pitch-black moments, surely this is true of Professor Fishbane's work. So please join me in welcoming him and all of the assembled guests to this important event.
Hello. It is such a profound honor and a simcha, a joy, to be here to celebrate your career. I haven't set foot here in a few years, and I cannot imagine a more meaningful and indeed poignant occasion for this return. In his seminars, in one-on-one study sessions, and in his published writings, I feel that Michael Fishbane taught me how to read in a totally new way. And I know that so many of his students feel this way. Our teacher's mode of reading is at the heart of this whole conference in his honor. The title, The Varieties of Hermeneutical Experience, arose through a conversation that Buzzy and I had, the two of us, and I think at the time we had no idea how urgently relevant this would feel given the context that Professor Moss was just describing that we're in right now, where how we interpret, make sense of, and indeed perceive the complexities of reality have life-giving and life-destroying consequences. Encompassing an enduring core of Fishbane's scholarship throughout his career as well, despite his far-reaching topics that Jim was just alluding to, covering literally the entirety of Jewish history, from the origins of the Hebrew Bible through contemporary theology, including his own. And that subtle allusion there to William James's Varieties reminds us that for Michael Fishbane, hermeneutics is not only about texts, it is about life, and perhaps even helping us point to some sort of fertile ground between reductionist perennialism and hypercritical constructivism. In these just brief opening remarks right now, I want to just situate our conference theme in relation to Michael Fishbane's lifetime of scholarship. The unifying theme throughout Buzzy's corpus of writing, spanning more than half a century, is Jewish hermeneutics. He has attuned his readers and students to the fact that Jewish thought throughout history has been exegetical through and through. In his groundbreaking book, Biblical Interpretation in Ancient Israel, he demonstrated that this is no less true in the Hebrew Bible itself than in post-biblical commentary traditions. While the canon was still open and in flux, the authors, whom Fishbane at times calls sage scribes, generally transmitted earlier formulations that appeared questionable or problematic in their eyes, but often integrated their own corrective narratives and qualifications into the text, either within those very verses or elsewhere in the biblical corpus. For Fishbane, it's precisely in the hermeneutical tensions between such clashing religious attitudes that biblical theology is revealed. In subsequent centuries, post-biblical Jewish individuals and communities have characteristically expressed Jewish wisdom vis-a-vis the texts and contexts of Jewish tradition and history. The paradigmatic example for Fishbane is the classical form of rabbinical exegesis known as Midrash, which certainly frustrates anyone in search of a definitive dogma or theological proof. Midrash is first and foremost biblical commentary, and it's precisely this interpretive discourse that embodies classical Jewish theology. This does not mean that the scholar's task is simply to isolate the theological utterances from their hermeneutical context and discern ideological patterns therefrom. This is something that Buzzy was constantly training us to avoid doing in our work. Such approaches are reductionist. Rather, Fishbane explains in the introduction to his Exegetical Imagination of 1998, quote, "The new biblical teachings are not abstract propositions, but forms of concrete discourse inspired by the shapes of Scripture. Change the citation and you change the exegesis. Exchange the exegesis and new theology is the result." He perceives complex confluences of voices in Midrashic teachings where disparate scriptural citations and often disagreeing rabbinic teachings are voices unto themselves, and the resultant hubbub of thick intertextuality constitutes the irreducible texture of rabbinic theology. Classical Jewish thought is thus fundamentally dialogical and intertextual. In Fishbane's own words, "On closer inspection, one must attend precisely to the concrete implications of a series of interpretations, for they often reflect dialectics or tensions of a complex sort." And he would make this come alive in the most vibrant, living ways in his writings, of course, but in his teaching in ways that I and still trying to figure out how he did that. Fishbane observed that these very dialectics and tensions in midrashic swirls of traditional citation and contemporary reflection are no more and no less than the teachings of rabbinic theology. His scholarship also focuses on how later medieval and modern Jewish thinkers continue to theologize as well in the key of exegesis. To be sure, Jews who looked upon sacred texts and rituals under the influence of Aristotle or Hegel, Neoplatonism-inflected mystical experiences, or Kantian critiques of reason, produced radically different theologies. But Fishbane has emphasized ways in which exegesis itself has remained the perennial matrix of Jewish theology. Already in his historical scholarship, there's a certain phenomenology and anthropology at play here. A person is a palimpsest, always already bearing inscriptions of texts in the broad sense of that word from the past in their being, even while exercising faculties of reflection and imagination. A nexus of primary sources and primordial intuitions, raw experiences, and the tradition and the language of tradition. It's both canonically rooted and richly creative. Even the most wildly imaginative myths in Judaism, those of sea monsters and heavenly battles, godly weeping, and divine eros, are citational in their very fabric, reworking the old as they express the new. In Saussur's terminology, the speech acts or parole of Jewish thought arise out of the lingual matrix or langue of Jewish sources. All of this, in its hermeneutical wholeness, constitutes the stuff of Jewish thought. The exegetical imagination extends as well beyond verbal expressions into the very thickness of life. Already in biblical interpretation in ancient Israel, Fishbane referred to embodied modes of hermeneutical expression as scriptural living and exegesis as action. Fishbane embraces Thomas Mann's concept of zitathaftes Leben, citational life, to refer to ways in which thought, behavior, and life perceptions all arise in relation to cultural sources. Religious lives shape religious texts, and religious texts shape religious lives. While this reflects a dimension of all cultures to varying degrees, Fishbane suggests that it's especially salient in the Jewish tradition. And inasmuch as Jewish theology is fundamentally exegetical, for Fishbane, even the most embodied enactments of Jewish textuality are indeed constitutive of Jewish thought. He declares in his book, Kiss of God of 1994, quote, "In all, Judaism is a vast intertextual system whose internal life expands and contracts through exegesis. This is the secret of its spirit, and this is the reason that even the love of God in Judaism is an interpreted love," end quote. When Fishbane published his Sacred Attunement in 2008, this represented a pronounced turn from historical theology to constructive theology, which he's continued to develop in essays and in his latest book, Fragile Finitude. While the theologian and the historian must communicate differently, even when they are the self-same soul, these more recent theological works actually incorporate many themes from Fishbane's scholarly corpus. Above all, this theology is hermeneutical to the core, most notably taking shape through the fourfold lens of Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drash, Sod, the varieties of hermeneutical experience in their own right. Ultimately, once again, Fishbane is teaching us how to read the texts of tradition and, no less importantly, the textures of life. This conference will bring together old friends and former students of Michael Fishbane who will focus on matters of hermeneutics in all of their dimensions, in dialogue with their teacher and friend, but also from within their own scholarship. bearing the variegated fruits of the fecund and fructifying career that Michael Fishbane has developed over the past half century or so. And I want to turn it over now to students, 3 students, who will speak to what I see as really the core of where Fishbane's brilliance and depth is manifest in his teaching. So I'm going to call up Deborah Green, Dove Lerner, and David Gottlieb, and I'll introduce them briefly and then invite them up. Deborah Green is Greenberg Associate Professor of Hebrew Language and Literature at the University of Oregon. Her books include The Aroma of Righteousness, Scent and Seduction in Rabbinic Life and Literature, as well as a co-edited volume with Laura Lieber in honor of Michael Fishbane from 2009. I'm doing very brief thumbnail introductions here. All of these scholars, we could say much more about each of them. Dove Lerner is rabbi of the Young Israel Synagogue in Jamaica Estates, New York, and a member of the faculty of Yeshiva University's Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought. And David Gottlieb, who I had the pleasure of studying with here some years ago, who's director of Jewish Studies at the Spertus Institute here in Chicago. Welcome.
Can you hear me okay? All right. Before I start, I really have to get this name thing clear with you. When Laura and I were students, we of course always refer to Professor Fishbane. And in the the course of my studies with Professor Fishbane, he was planning a dinner for the donors who were giving the money that essentially became Dean Robinson's position. And this endeavor, as I listened to him talk about it, seemed to be going a little bit awry. And I worked as a marketing consultant before I came to grad school, and I offered Professor Fishbane, look, I'll give you a discount on my consulting rate, but I think you really need to call me in. And in the first meeting I had with all of the people who were working on making this happen and who had worked with the donors, they, of course, were the administrators at the university, and they referred to him as Buzzy all the time. But now I was stepping in as this person that everyone was looking to for advice and direction. So after the first meeting, I said to Professor Fishbane, is it okay if I refer to you as Buzzy during these meetings? And he said, yes, of course. But I really want you to go back to calling me Professor Fishbane after that, because it makes a difference on what happens as you move forward as a student, right, in terms of our interaction and taking direction. And I said, okay. And I went back to calling him Professor Fishbane. And many years have passed, and I too got to hear from Bernice the story. I specifically asked her, and Laura and I wrote about it in the introduction to the first Festschrift. And so I've had trouble ever since calling Buzzy. So, in my talk, and I know I went a little bit over now, but in my talk, I am going to refer to him as Professor Fishbane. I came to the Divinity School at the age of 34, long after undergraduate studies, and as an already fully formed, mature adult. Unlike many of the students at the Divinity School, I had already had one career and a lot of life experience. But it did not have to happen that way. As I got to know Professor Fishbane, he kept asking me whether we had ever met at Brandeis University, to which I had transferred after my freshman year of college. I told him no, and I couldn't figure out why he kept asking. I had been an English major and had asked an English professor to be my advisor within the first few months of school. To my surprise, however, a couple years into the Div School, I was cleaning out a drawer in my home office, and I discovered my grade report from my first semester at Brandeis. The university had assigned an advisor to me before I came, and the registrar had not yet changed that name to my English advisor. You guessed it, Michael Fishbane was the name on my transcript. Now, we can't know whether the course of my life would have been different had I seen Professor Fishbane for advising oh so long ago. I wonder if I would have appreciated him then as much as I have getting to know him as an adult over these almost 30 years. Nevertheless, getting to know him has been delightful and enlightening. Let me tell you a little bit about that Midrash class that we just heard about. We would prepare a small amount at home, translating, thinking, reading. In class, we would read a little and translate. Then came Professor Fishbane's method of teaching, that Socratic method. He would ask questions, we would answer. We would ask questions, he would answer. As we moved through the text, word by word, he would explicate. Line by line, he would delve deeper into the undergirding of the textual frame and nuance. Passage by passage, we would be led on a journey of ideas, themes, coherencies, and of course, a discussion of rabbinic myth-making, or to use our professor's term, mythopoesis. It took me some time to understand my teacher's refrain, what you really learn from me is how I read text. I saw it begin to develop in my papers, in my dissertation, and finally in my articles and books. Slowly and patiently, Professor Fishbane taught me to read the text in its myriad of stacked metaphors and allusions, and to come to my own ideas about it. More than that, it taught me how to teach texts. Today, regardless of topic or text or class level, I have employed this same method of teaching. It allows students to master the skill rather than just the material. And students have come back to thank me. So, thank you, Professor. I studied in Israel for a year and wrote my dissertation prospectus. Each day I spent at the National Library in Jerusalem, one or another scholar would ask me about my method. I could not articulate my method. I was studying olfaction and sense and how these played out in the Bible and rabbinic interpretation. I was also focused on the historical and material culture of Roman and rabbinic Palestine. I couldn't grasp at first how these inklings and ideas fit together. I called Professor Fishbane from Israel and told him I couldn't figure out how to write a seamless proposal. He told me to put all my notes away and just write. Okay, I said, but what about this method thing that people keep talking to me about? He said, stop talking to these other people. You will find your method as you write. I hung up feeling pretty calm and back on track, although still kind of unsure. But I did exactly what he told me to do. I put all my notes and translations away, and I wrote. I continued to do that day after day until I had a prospectus. And I did stop talking to people about it, because only the women really took my talk seriously. Men, not so much, except for one scholar who was working on illness in the medieval period. Lovely guy. I should add that it has occurred to me many times that Professor Fishbane might have already known my topic and how that dissertation would unfold before I did. Dayenu, it would have been enough for our advisor to be excellent in teaching and guiding us. That he has also taught me many other important skills is worth sharing here. I can't really get through this talk without mentioning Tori Waters, another Fishbane student. She was my Chavruta partner, and in the first year of the PhD program, she was diagnosed with a very serious cancer. I come from a medical family, and my father was very clear in the first discussion with him that Tori would not survive this cancer, that I should hold no false illusions that she would recover from the cancer regardless of treatment. As that year continued, Tori and her husband Larry fought this cancer with whichever way they could: chemo, stem cell transplant, and radiation. As her friend and partial caregiver, I met with doctors, stayed with her during treatments, grocery shopped. You get the idea. As her time drew near, I called Professor Fishbane and told him that we were very close to the end. He came to the hospital and stayed with me, Larry, and Cass Fisher as Tori passed. Professor Fishbane was completely present with us. There was no distraction, only calm and kindness. Although I was heartbroken, I felt quietly supported. In the days that followed, there was a memorial service at the Div School before Tori was flown back to California for burial. Professor Fishbane met with me and others to engage us in memories and reminiscences. He gave the eulogy, and when he did, I felt he not only captured her, but was able to translate our feelings of pain and grief carefully, and I mean with care and compassion. When it was time to go to California for the burial, I didn't think I had any more strength to go. And here Mona stepped in. She had been a resource for me throughout, and now I needed the kind of support that would hear my exhaustion, affirm it, and still be able to see down the road how I might feel in the coming years if I did not go. Mona, I would not have been able to get on that plane without you. While Tori was ill, I had many discussions with my parents about their wishes, and during that time they gave me power of attorney over their health decisions. Over the years, I seem to have become the go-to person in my extended family to assist with end-of-life decisions, memorial services, burials, and shivas. When my mother moved into her final days, even though we had a difficult relationship at times, I was able to be totally present for her. For the last 10 years, I've been participating in my synagogue's Haver Kadisha committee. Professor Fishbane's example of calm presence, compassion, listening, and eulogizing has set an example for me. On to happier things. Before I leave the topic of students and teaching, Professor Fishbane demonstrated that teaching does not end when one finishes the lecture and leaves the classroom. When I TA'd for him, I had a student that was under some kind of mental duress and could not finish the final. Sitting with 25%, or less of a final in my grading stack, I alerted Professor Fishbane right away. He met with the student and they figured out a strategy wherein the student could still pass and the student could receive the support that he needed. Teaching big classes at the University of Oregon, this interaction is not always easy, but I try. During and since COVID, I have had several students who have been unable to demonstrate their knowledge in a regimented time period of a midterm or a final, or whose mental health issues are so serious some kind of helpful intervention is necessary to get them the resources they need. My professor taught me how to help these students without overstepping the teacher-student boundary. In that role of teacher and guide, inside and outside of the classroom, Professor Fishbane did something else for me. Having lost my Chavruta partner, I was slogging through material for comps on my own. Professor Fishbane suggested that I meet up with a new student, Laura Lieber, to meet and talk and see if she wanted to study together. Well, I don't think we got a lot of studying done, but the shidduch worked. Laura, in her own kind and patient way, gave me room to open up slowly and continue to grieve for Tori while also making a best friend for life. We are sisters of different mothers. Thank you, Professor Fishbane. Professor Fishbane was, also a teacher for his community. And there you set another example. No grad students in the community Talmud class at the house. A firm rule. I didn't understand it at the time, but I do now. During COVID, my rabbi asked me to start a Nach class. You know, the rabbi does the Torah study every week, and I'm supposed to teach Nevi'im and Ktuvim. Our group is in its third year, I think. Well, all of those years merge into one. And today, we actually are now at the place where we just did, this afternoon, we finished, and we're at 1 Kings 17 for 15. So that's working out well. And we had started, by the way, at Joshua, so we're going straight through. We've remained on Zoom because many of the community members are immunocompromised or have moved to other areas. Even my dad at 94 in Los Angeles can participate on Sunday mornings. It's been really fun, and I now realize why you said no students, because I don't want any UO students in my class either. It's not a graduate class or even an undergraduate class. The questions are different. The discussion is different. On a more personal note, I got other good lessons from Professor Fishbane. When his sons were in college and grad school and they would come to see him, he kissed his sons and they kissed him in public and at work. That was something I had never had growing up with my father. It was a different day and age, and people didn't usually show demonstrable love and affection for their children in public. When I saw it, the warmth that both sons have for their father and he for them, that was so easy and natural, I realized that I had really wanted that in my family of origin. I didn't have it, but I've definitely been able to give it to my son. And now he will hug me just to hug me, and he will let me hug him just to hug him. And he's a teenager, so that's not nothing. As the years went by, the Fishbanes invited me over to their house, very kindly, for different holidays and dinners. I had a lovely time with his family. I always enjoyed everyone, but I have to say, I have a special place in my heart for Bernice, Professor Fishbane's mother. She was so delightful, and I loved sitting next to her. She was funny and easy and feisty. When I started to date the man who would become my second husband, we went to dinner at the Fishbanes' house together. Regardless of how the marriage turned out, these things happen, I got Bernice's judgment and pass that it was okay to keep dating him. That friendship has also been true of Professor Fishbane and Mona. Professor, congratulations on your retirement. Your example in life as a teacher, as a community leader, and so much more has been an example that I can model. Thank you.
I have some sheets to hand out if people would like them, even if you don't.
As the sheets go around, I just know what a immense privilege it is that I feel to be here. I want to thank Sam for all the organizing, all the other organizing that took place through all those who put this together. It is a privilege to share a stage with Deborah and David as well, and I thank them for those, and I thank Deborah for those wonderful remarks. Say again? Oh, louder. Sure, sorry about that. So, under Title 18 of the United States Criminal Code, Section 1512, it is a federal crime to intimidate a witness. A crime so severe that a conviction is punishable by up to 20 years in prison. To pressure or threaten or even persuade a potential witness to change or suppress a testimony is taken as an affront to the quest for justice, an assault on the pursuit of truth, and an existential peril to civil society. But there is one law
not in the United States criminal code, but in the rabbinic criminal code, that not only permits witness intimidation, it insists upon it. And it is a text that Professor Fishbane introduced me to in a room in this building that has stuck with me ever since. It is a text about which I vividly remember Professor Fishbane saying that if one ever wanted a justification for rabbinic tradition, this would be it. And I would like to spend just a few moments reviewing it with you, and I've given you pretty pictures to distract you if you get bored as well. That should keep you happy. So in the 4th chapter of the volume of the Mishnah devoted to the rabbinic judicial system called Sanhedrin, the sages pose a rather simple question. Ketzad ma'ayamim al eidei nevashot. How ought we to intimidate witnesses in a capital case? In a trial where a defendant, if convicted, could be sentenced to death, the rabbinic court deliberately and meticulously set out to scare any witnesses, forcing them to think twice, attuning their mind to the human life before their eyes, before testifying. And the sages then describe the process of intimidation. We would bring them into the court, put them on the stand, and start to frighten them. As follows, we would say, Shema tomu ma'omed, maybe your testimony is based on speculation or conjecture. Maybe mishmua aid mipi aid, maybe it is based on rumor or hearsay. O shema iatem yodim shesafenu libdok etchem, or maybe you're not aware that we will interrogate you, b'dusha v'chakira, and submit you to a cross-examination. And once the witnesses are forced to pause by means of this series of interrogative and eretetic declarations, the court reminds them of the irrevocable and irreparable quality of whatever it is that they are about to say. The court tells them, Havu Yodim, surely you know, Shelo Kedini Mamano Dinin Nefashot, that civil and criminal trials are different things. The Dinin Mamamo, that in civil trials, Adam Noten Mamo Mitchapelo, you can always repay and achieve expiation, but in Dinin Nefashot, in capital cases, Damo, the victim's blood, V'dam Otav, and the blood of their progeny, Taluyinbo, Adsafa Ulam, hangs on the witnesses until the end of time. Made to reflect on the necessity of their accuracy and told to expect an intense interrogation, the witnesses are reminded that capital cases are not a game. Unlike money, human life, once taken, cannot simply be repaid or resuscitated, and the damage is never constrained to a single soul or a single sliver of time. It bleeds interminably through time, forever repressing any potential the condemned had for inspiring life. And then, as if to concretize the immutability and force the witnesses to visualize the potential injury of inaccuracy, the court offers the witnesses a lesson in attentiveness through interpreting scripture, suggesting that to make a mistake in a capital case approaches the behavior of Cain. So the court continues its intimidation of any witness on the stand by saying, Shekain matzinu b'kayin. We find such a thing with Cain, Shaharaget Achiv, who killed his brother, Shne'emar, as it says in the verse, Demei achichat zoakim, your brother's bloods cry out. And I've tried to put on the sheet for you the Hebrew with the extra letter that signify this exegetical move. Einu omer dam achicha, it doesn't say the blood of your brother cries out when God criticizes Cain, Ela demei achicha, but in the plural, the bloods of your brother, which indicates damo v'dam utav, his blood, and the blood of his offspring. And though the Hebrew is grammatically unproblematic, simply using a collective noun, the sages show that a slow reading of the text can disclose more than meets the eye, and teach the witnesses that every death brings an end to more than just the direct victim. The first fratricide did not simply take a single life, but eliminated a whole line of people yet to be born. So the witnesses on the stand are made to understand that when they testify, a life hangs in the balance, and with it, so much more. They are forced to see the accused as their brother, and forced to see their speech as potentially another kind of weapon. They are taught that using words to convince a court to kill is no less heinous than blunt force trauma, and it may even be more, because a cold judicial assassination can insulate the conscience from feelings of blame or shame or horror. And to ensure that they cannot evade the weight of their words, the court then forces the witnesses to picture an image that grips the mind and sends chills down the spine. They say to the witnesses, davar acher. There is another way to read that extra letter in the biblical text. Demei achicha, maybe it says your brother's blood's in the plural. Shahaya dama mushlach al ha'itzim v'al avanim, because his blood was thrown all over the trees and the stones. Sitting and absorbing a warning in a quiet and clean court of law, witnesses are forced to imagine the crime scene of the first murder and the very real consequences of their words. And offering these two readings of an extra letter embedded in the biblical text, the sages of the court once more reveal the importance of thinking twice and fill the witnesses' minds with all the power and the pain that a single life can contain. Then they pronounce a soaring line that defines the rabbinic attitude towards humankind, with the aim of attuning the witnesses to the devastating force of even a small lie and the creative power of a just silence. They say, Nivra Adam Yechidi. The first man was made alone. Lelamedcha, to teach you, Shekol Hama'abed Nefesh Echad, that whoever takes a single soul, Ma'ale Elaf HaKatov, is seen by Scripture, Kilu Ubed Olam Malei, that they have destroyed the world entire. V'chol Makayem Nefesh Echad, and whoever saves or sustains a single soul, Ma'ale HaKatov, is considered by Scripture, Kilu Kayem Olam Malei, to have sustained or saved the world entire, which of course for many will be familiar from a scene toward the end of Schindler's List, as he handed a ring by survivors with this citation inscribed. So not only does the court deploy Scripture's narrative resources to force all capital witnesses to see the accused as their brother Abel, but it uses biblical anthropology to remind them that we are all connected to each other, that humanity at its core is one extended family. There is a sense that the mere threat of being caught committing perjury is not enough to inhibit a figure from inflicting injury by means of lies that might trip the court machinery. So the rabbinic sages insist that any witness needs to be reminded rhetorically, exegetically, visually, poetically, and emphatically of the value of human life, the horrors of a violent death, and the bonds that tie us all together. So while Title 18 of the U.S. Criminal Code prohibits intimidating a witness, the Rabbinic Criminal Code insists that witnesses receive some scripted intimidation to remind them of the weight of their words, the stakes of the capital case, and the value of each human life. In sum, it is a short and extraordinary passage that exhibits the commitment and ingenuity of rabbinic tradition, and in so many ways showcases what Professor Fishbane's teaching and mentorship has done for me. Over my 6 years here, I had the privilege to sit in a whole range of Professor Fishbane's classes on topics from liturgical poetry and Emmanuel Levinas to Hasidic exegesis, ecclesiastics, and the poetics of Midrash. And in every instance, together with the substance of the material itself, it was his delicate and sensitive pedagogy that left a lasting impression. He attuned us as students to every level of depth in whichever text we were reading, including its original context, its authorial intent, its historical reception, semiotic flexibility, and hermeneutic effects. And in doing this, Professor Fishbane always evinced a tempered passion that demonstrated a blend of personal fervor and deference to us, giving us the tools and the space to engage and evaluate the layers of text, while implying that we ought to apply that same patience and generosity and respect and sensitivity to our peers. Like the rabbinic sages, he used text to sensitize us to human complexity, making study not simply an intellectual project, but a humanizing endeavor. In fact, when I first arrived here, just over a decade ago, I was part of the MA program, which at the time, as I understand it does now, requires every student to take a course called Introduction to the Study of Religion. And the second half of the quarter involved a series of guest lectures, foregrounding different disciplines and traditions represented in the school, but the first half involved us performing a close reading of Paul Ricoeur's The Symbolism of Evil. I was so excited to be here. I felt so blessed to be here. My father had studied at the University of Chicago in the 70s, so I felt a family connection, and I was inspired, as I am right now, by the beauty of this wonderful campus, as it differed ever so slightly from the concrete blocks of my undergraduate institution in Washington Heights, Manhattan. But reading, or more accurately trying to read, The Symbolism of Evil made me think that maybe I had made a mistake in coming. Or maybe, worse, the university had made a mistake in letting me come. I found the text so dense and complex that every sentence felt like a test of my mental stamina. I read and reread page after page, trying to make sense of Ricoeur's thesis and claims, but found his style almost impossible to translate into my vernacular. And for that I thank you, Professor Rosengarten. It was comforting to find, in conversation with fellow students, that I was not alone in my struggle, but I sought more than the solace of a shared frustration. So on one of the first days on campus, I took my book and I knocked on Professor Fishbane's office door. After inviting me in, we sat for some time reading together, parsing the sentences together, reflecting on Ricoeur's style and idiom together, which slowly lifted my spirits and lowered my stress. It was a simple gesture, but it eased my pain and it made me feel seen. It gave me the confidence to read on and glean deep wisdom from Ricoeur and open the door to so much more. And there are many other memories of your attentiveness just like that one, including the first time that we met, my research and the many sermons of mine that you read, the references and recommendations that you wrote, and the occasion on which you hosted my wife and I in your home. But there is one memory with which I'll finish that predates our first encounter. As I drew near to the end of my rabbinic ordination and first began to explore the concrete possibilities of graduate study, I reached out to friends and mentors about the various programs in religion all over the country. And when I asked about the Divinity School at the University of Chicago, I heard time and time again the same piece of advice. And I can hear the voices saying to me, if you come to Chicago simply to be in the company of Professor Michael Fishbane, it would be worth it, just to witness and learn from his humanity. How right they were. Every single day, I am grateful for your teaching, for your time, for your attention, for your kindness, and for your humanity. And as we formally mark your retirement, I want to wish you, together with Mona and Eitan and Alicia and the rest of the family, only good health and success and happiness and every blessing. So I thank you.
Good afternoon. I first want to thank Professor Fishbane, who I still have trouble calling Buzzy, Deborah. Maybe you can do a tutorial on this afterwards. I want to thank Professor Fishbane, as well as Mona, Eitan, and Lisha, Sam Shonkoff, Sarah Bigger, and the conference organizers for this event, and for including me in it. The truth is that although I haunted these halls for a decade, I almost always felt I had no business being here. Mine has been a learning in reverse order, something along the lines of what Franz Rosenzweig envisioned in the establishment of the Lehrhaus. He called it a learning that no longer starts from the Torah and leads into life, but the other way around, from life back to the Torah. That I got to engage in such a learning at all was due in no small part to the generosity of spirit and the gently demanding ministrations of Michael Fishbane. Deborah, I'm sorry, but I have you beat in the category of decrepitude. I was in my late 40s when I was granted access to the Divinity School. At the time, I lived in a northern suburb about 35 miles from here, not far, as it turns out, from Buzzy and Mona's home at the time. I was married with 3 children, 2 of whom were already out of the house, and I had a demanding and fulfilling job running the nonprofit affordable housing development company I had co-founded several years earlier. When other people of my ilk might have been buying a Porsche or going skydiving, or perhaps just doing their job, I was answering a calling to delve deeply into the study of Jewish text. I applied and was accepted into the PhD program in the history of Judaism, but then it was discovered that my master's degree of ancient vintage was not in a related field, so I was encouraged to enter the master's in divinity program instead, and we'd see how it went. It's good that events transpired as they did, because I needed the master's program in order to attain a grounding in the academic study of religion and to slowly, and with some trepidation, immerse myself in the teaching and thought and company of Michael Fishbane. This began with a course on the book of Job and the problem of evil, and continued with courses on contemporary Jewish theology, Jewish spiritual practices, rabbinic Midrash, and hermeneutics and tradition, as well as a couple of independent study courses. The readings range through Torah, Stoicism, jurisprudence, of course Midrash and Talmud, and Professor Fishbane's own theology, which poured his comprehensive knowledge and exquisite sensitivity to text into awareness of each moment, each dialogical moment, each point of crossing. Gradually, a relationship with Professor Fishbane developed as he drew me into the vast reach and depth of rabbinic creativity, a preliminary understanding of how fundamental that creativity was to forms of Jewish memory, and beyond this, to the depths of experience waiting to be revealed through deep and focused learning. I earned the master's degree and was accepted into the PhD program in my early 50s. While studying biblical and rabbinic Hebrew and studying for reading exams in French, German, and modern Hebrew, I was also continuing to learn how to learn from Professor Fishbane. Sam, I think you're exactly right that we not only learned how to read all over again, but really learned how to learn from you all over again. I was continuing to learn from Buzzy, as I'm still trying to get used to calling him, about the multivalence of text, how it illuminates the prismatic nature of each moment and each relationship, and how these in turn help develop radically new ways of seeing and being in the world. Under Buzzy's guidance, I studied how rabbinic substitutions for sacrifice and the archetypal substitution of the ram for Isaac became the fulcrum of a memory form that relied on interpretive ingenuity to find evidence of divine care even in the midst of rupture. While I was not permitted entry into some classes, I suppose for lack of technical skill, Michael Fishbane honored my efforts and helped me develop the skills that I needed. There was never a sense with him that he wished to be somewhere else or talking to someone more important. I was never told by him that I didn't have the requisite skills to enroll in or contribute to his class, even though I didn't. A kind of kinship emerged based on a love of careful reading, but also in mutual appreciation of the challenges and pleasures of the bifurcated experience of the academy and the rest of life. In my case, of children having left or leaving home, and parents needing more help, the travails of my day job, and for both Buzzy and me, the great distances, geographical and otherwise, from the northern suburbs to Hyde Park, and between the worlds of deep study and the numerous daily commitments that comprised the rest of life. He lives his theology. As he writes in Sacred Attunement, the human being before us is a divine image of life, a life form wrought from the infinities of God's Torah Klula and inscribed with earthly particularity, like the written Torah. As we come to know this person, we try to read the emergent life expressions with all this in mind, and attempt to perceive in such appearances or manners of speech something of the deeper self not explicitly expressed. And as we speak with this person in the hope of drawing forth information so that the relationship will not be based on assumptions or projections, there unfolds something like oral Torah. During the course of my graduate education, I not only struggled to gain the skills necessary for deep study, I also struggled to keep all the balls in the air. I continued to run the nonprofit, although I was passing more and more responsibility to my eventual successor, and my family went through a great deal during this period. In my third year in the PhD program, our middle daughter was badly injured in a car accident while on a visit home from college. The next year, our son somehow managed to suffer 2 concussions in one high school soccer game and needed months to recover. And later that same year, my wife was diagnosed with cancer and began a grueling year of treatment. She is here and healthy 9 years later. 1 year after that, I was TAing for Sarah Hammerschlag, and during that course, my father passed away. Buzzy's kind and attentive presence and patience through all of this extended his generosity and presence into the most important relationships and aspects of my life. Indeed, the tutelage of Professor Fishbane, Buzzy, and his colleague Paul Mendes-Flohr were what enabled me to survive the rigors and the ritual humiliations of graduate education. They encouraged and guided my interest in the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, and its influence on the formation of Jewish cultural memory. I came to see Isaac himself as an example for our time, not just in his recovery from trauma, scarred though he most certainly must have been, but in his example as a person capable, despite everything, of feeling and expressing love, of drawing sustenance from the earth, and of being able to redig his father's wells and make peace with his neighbors. In my own life, the study of Isaac proved to be more than a purely intellectual exercise, as was any study with Buzzy. A little more than 2 years ago, I suffered a random and violent physical assault. My weeks of recuperation proceeded in part through a study of Isaac's own long recuperation from his ordeal in the place the Lord had shown his father. I explored the meaning of the redigging of patriarchal wells and the names Isaac bestowed on his 3 new wells, his own wells, Esek, or strife, Sitna, or hatred, and Rehobot, or expansiveness. This was, I saw, the pathway that I would have to follow in recovering from my own physical and psychic injuries. I was to move through the sudden violence of the attack itself and of the random recurrence of its sensations and sights, through the volcanic hatred I felt toward my attacker, into expansiveness and gradual recovery. The events of recent weeks suggest Isaac's pathway toward endurance, independence, and peaceful coexistence is the path that all of humanity, all of us, must tread if we are to endure and exist b'tselem Elokim. Surviving strife and contention must somehow be followed by a new and mutual spaciousness for self and other on microcosmic and macrocosmic scales alike. However, speaking once again of my own personal experience, I must make clear that I am not suggesting that I was Isaac to Michael Fishbane's Abraham. Though he led me up the mountain, I was not bound and placed on the altar. I was instead challenged to be fully present to what was glowing in the heights, to the text, and I was challenged to bring all the tools and experiences at my disposal to the act of interpretation, and I was challenged to be present to him as well. In an effort to capture the quality, if not the particulars, of my relationship with Buzzy, I have condensed all the memories of all my encounters with Michael Fishbane into one midrashic memory, which I will share with you now. It is early winter quarter. I'm sitting outside his office. There are 2 other students in front of me waiting to meet with him. I answer work emails. I check in at home. A student draws out his exit from Professor Fishbane's office, standing in the office doorway and milking another 4 minutes and 27 seconds out of the account. Buzzy graciously extends his wisdom for that entire time period. When I finally attain the inner sanctum, I am confronted with 2 great walls of scholarship, books floor to ceiling, a large table covered with texts from every conceivable period and discipline, and before me, the halo of white hair, the magisterial beard, the sweater vest outlined against the gathering gloom. Outside, the sky has already darkened and the first significant snow of the calendar year has already turned black. Buzzy and I compare notes on the drive from the northern suburbs, ask after each other's families, and then move on to discussing the 7th draft of the first chapter of my dissertation. As Professor Fishbane takes up his theme, I pull out my notebook and begin scribbling furiously, but Buzzy interrupts me. "Please," he says, with only a little exasperation, "put your pen away, close the notebook, okay? It's not always necessary to write everything down." Okay, I think, but how will I remember what he says? I can't keep up with the concepts and connections that spring fully formed out of his forehead. I can't remember it all, and isn't this all about memory? Of course, he remembers, but then it occurs to me that he is not bestowing spontaneously formed wisdom on a superannuated acolyte. He's inviting a dialogue, and there the dialogue truly begins. For me, the way of study is atelic, a path pursued for its own sake. The fundamental challenge for scholars is that an atelic activity has a telic structure around it. The demands of the career and the economics of sustaining the university as a corporate concern threaten to drown teaching, research, and writing in a swamp of busyness. But scholarship is a service profession, and at the heart of that service is a series of commitments, not merely to process or promotion or reputation, but to presence and persistence and patience and scholarship and relationship. This too I learned from Michael Fishbane. In his classroom, in his office, and even learning with him while seated at his kitchen or his dining room table, Buzzy showed me how to begin to fathom the multi-layered miracle of text as an encounter with the sacred through the other. It is what I try in my own more limited way to bring to my own students now. And it is why I will always be a student of Michael Fishbane's, not his best or his brightest, but certainly his most fortunate and most grateful. Thank you.
Well, I'm here because I'll be through
introduce my dearest friend, Art Green, but I would be remiss if I didn't say how truly overwhelmed it is to hear the statements by all my students whom I so deeply love and have cared for all of these years. I never realized that I was seen that way. I just sort of thought I was trying to be a good teacher. So I never, it's all the more powerful to me to realize that I could be present and so helpful to so many people, and that that you all were willing to bring the raw of your life into your expressions of your relationship with me, and didn't separate any of that from what it means to be a student or a scholar. So I'll have probably occasion to speak a little bit more, and personally, and a couple of other occasions during the next 2 days, and certainly towards the end. But you have come at this hour to hear Professor Rabbi Art Green. And so I want to also say that this gives me the occasion and the opportunity to express a lifetime of respect and gratitude to Art, who I've known for 50 years. With your permission, I'll just spend a couple of words about something of that background 50 years ago. It was 1967, and it was in the midst of the Vietnam War. I was a graduate student, and I was going to one of my first conferences at Society of Biblical Literature at Union Theological Seminary. And someone came up to me and said, there's going to be a very interesting meeting at the Jewish Theological Seminary tonight. Would you like to come and listen to the discussion? And that discussion was the beginning for me of a great transformation. And as in all things, Art was already ahead of all of us in so many ways. The discussion really had, at that point, had two prongs. One had derived from a conversation he had had with Professor Abraham Joshua Heschel because of the involvement of the Berrigan brothers and the Catholics in the peace movement. Why was there not a comparable peace movement that emerged from serious Jewish sources in the mid-60s? And related to that, what about the possibility of a religious community being formed in the midst of the moral crisis that we were experiencing, but also in the midst of the 60s, which was openness to world religions, openness to so many things? It was really an incredible brew of what it meant to be a human being at that period of time. Well, in that discussion, they began to form the need for a new religious community, a religious fellowship that would focus on community, that would focus on study, and that would focus on prayer. And as the years moved on, Art was always ahead in his vision of all of these things, but one of the core aspects was learning a new language. We had to define with the renewal of Judaism at that point, because this was the beginning of New Age Judaism, the beginning of the Jewish renewal movement, of which Art was so prominent and so important. He was learning a new language of friendship. He was learning a new language of how to read texts attentively and personally. And he was part of a much larger liturgical renewal that was going on in the Catholic Church as well. And both Art and I had spent time in certain monastery settings where we actually witnessed those, the Western Priory in Vermont. So art, at one level, is a creator of culture forms. It was not only beginning of the Chavarat Shalom in the Jewish Community Seminary and Center that we had. He helped organize the curriculum and the life of the Rabbinical College, reconstructions of Rabbinical College and the Boston Hebrew College, and now being online with all kinds of major learning of what it means to be a present religious leader. Art was, that was the community aspect. The aspect of learning, I remember still when Art was writing his dissertation, he wrote it on Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. And just as an indication of the incredible life that we had in those days, everybody would remember Professor Alexander Altman, one of the great medievalists, and Professor McGinn, Bernie McGinn, also studied with Professor Altman. But Professor Altman also is the supervisor of the dissertation on Rabbi Nachman, because he studied not many people knew, but he studied with Joseph Weiss when he came to Manchester and to London. He was very much involved in that spiritual dimension. There wasn't a separation between these levels. But the key thing that I want to mention is that Art wrote that it was a concrete biography of a concrete life, a concrete theological life. And that is bookended by the most recent one on Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdyshev, which again is the concrete life of living theology, to see a life in concrete form. The other thing I would want to mention is the enormous amount of translation that Art has done. It's so voluminous, but it's opened up that new language of what it means to be a Jew in our time, and I don't think I'd be betraying a secret, and I hope that people will remember this, but I heard it from Art first, and I'm sharing it all with you. But Art's dream is that he wanted to do and to be remembered for Jewish homiletics, for Jewish homilies, the rabbinic, the Hasidic homilies, what Buber had done for the tales. And I think you have done that, Art, and we're so grateful for what you've done. In addition to all of that is the honest and careful theology that always remains in touch with the person and the tension and the reality of what it means to be a person living now. And I remember in that very first conversation when we were talking about how to build our community seminary, and we invited Professor Nachum Glotzer, who had been part of the Belair House in 1921. And I remember Glotzer saying one thing. He said, all this radical stuff is very nice. He said, well, he said in his very German accent, he says, but remember, the root of radical is radix. It's root, and you have to be rooted. You have to be rooted, and if you're not rooted in the tradition, then it doesn't sink in. So with all of these reflections, I wanted to share all of this because there are many ways that you have heard of Arthur Green, Professor, Rabbi, the person, and it is such an honor and a way of giving back great thanks that I wanted to thank Art for coming and giving the opening talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Buzzy. I had no difficulty calling you that. It's 55 years, not just 50. When Sam asked me to do this, I was very deeply honored and touched. I was also a little bit frightened and awed. In addition to being a dear friend for 55 years, a friendship that has grown closer over the years, Buzzy is also one of the most brilliant minds I've ever had the privilege of encountering in my life. And I didn't know that I would be adequate to this task. So I have a feeling that everything I say will somehow not be enough. This is also the first time in quite a while that I've spoken from a written text, so you'll forgive me for that as well. In his autobiography, Dreams, Memories, and Reflections, Carl Gustav Jung records the following dream. I was in a house that I did not know, which had 2 stories. It was my house. I found myself in the upper story where there was a kind of salon, furnished with fine old pieces in Rococo style. On the walls hung a number of precious old paintings. I wondered that this should be my house, and I said, not bad. But then it occurred to me I did not know what the lower floor looked like. Descending the stairs, I reached the ground floor. There, everything was much older. And I realized this part of the house must date from the 15th or 16th century. The furnishings were medieval. The floors were red brick. There, everything was rather dark. I went from one room to another, thinking now I really must explore the whole house. I came upon a heavy door and opened it. Beyond it, I discovered layers of brick among the ordinary stone blocks and chips of brick in the mortar. As soon as I saw this, I knew that the walls dated from Roman times. My interest was by now intense. I looked more closely at the floor. It was of stone slabs. And then in one of them I discovered a ring. When I pulled it, the stone slab lifted, and again I saw a stairway of narrow stone steps leading down into the depths. These too I descended, and entered a little cave cut into the rock. Thick dust lay on the floor, and in the dust were scattered bones and broken pottery, like the remains of a primitive culture. I discovered 2 broken skulls, obviously very old and half disintegrated. Then I awoke. Jung then adds rather sardonically, what chiefly interested Freud in this dream were the 2 skulls. My dear friend Buzzy and I began graduate school together, as he said, in 1967, together with Paul Mendes-Flohr. I remember that Buzzy was unhappy with the attention to the archaeological aspects of the biblical research in which he was becoming engaged. I recall him saying something like, the Bible is not just a bunch of old pots. Yet this man, over the course of these nearly 5 decades, has become our chief archaeologist of the Jewish mythical and literary imagination. Hermeneutics, imagination, creativity, and as we shall see, eros, or the essential energy of life itself, all combined fully in the unique approach to the tradition and its sources that he has developed and shared with us. Watching his career over these 5 decades has been a masterclass in the ongoing development and deepening of that literary imagination, descending or ascending from story to story in its house. He began as a Bible scholar, but then soon turned to Midrash, and especially to the methodology of rabbinic hermeneutics. From there he moved on to Kabbalah, sensing how much the new symbolic language created by the Kabbalists deepened the reservoir from which interpretation could be formed. In more recent years, he's even proceeded on to Hasidut, the place where I had planted my tent from the very beginning. To be fair, some of this was there from the start. Fishbane's spiritual legacy goes back to Nachum Glatzer and then to Rosenzweig, as much as it does to Nachum Sarna and then to H.L. Ginsberg and others. In preparing these remarks, I recalled a class Buzzy offered at Chavorat Shalom, our shared religious community, sometime in the late 60s or early 70s, on Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, Hashemayim Misaprim Kvodeo. I remember he was dismissive of the question of whether this was one psalm or 2 psalms joined together, one devoted to nature and the sun, and the other to Torah and wisdom. The analogy, he claimed, was just the point. Then when he came to the end of the psalm, he interpreted the words, Gam avdecha nizhar bahem, your servant is warned or is careful about them, as possibly containing a play on words with, is enlightened by them, nizhar from the word Zohar. Such a reading had already occurred to me, but I thought it to be strictly in the realm of Hasidic homily. The idea that a serious Bible scholar might consider it as real was overwhelming. That was one of the many moments when I recall when I began to take Fishbane seriously, as an insightful and open-minded reader of the text and tradition. Both the time allotted here and the significant limitation of my abilities bar me from undertaking a thorough review of the many writings that so many of you know so well already, and particularly Buzzy's two recent theological treatises. Instead, I've decided to go back to an article that very much grabbed my attention and was first published in 1975. This was his first articulation of the importance he found in the fourfold reading of Scripture, Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. Terms that have undoubtedly become familiar to you through your perusal or really your study, because that's what it takes of Buzzy's writings. The article is called The Teacher and the Hermeneutical Task, a reinterpretation of medieval exegesis. And I see now that Buzzy has chosen that as the title of his talk tomorrow afternoon as well. So either he got it from my asking him for the article, or perhaps it was as important to him as it was to me. And it appeared in the Journal of the American Academy of Religion. There it's already clear that the Pshat refers to the received text, the entire unit within the scriptural text as it stands before us. It is not to be chopped and divided into fragments or purported sources. It stands as a phenomenon, as a text in itself. And we are to confront it with the wholeness of our own being, bringing life and text into dialogue with one another through the absolutely vital hermeneutical process. There is no text for us without interpretation. Quoting him in 1975, but the Pshat is always in need of Remez. We know this at the painful core of our task as teachers. The text in itself is majestically silent. Without a reader, that is to say an interpreter, the text would not live. I, when reading this, heard the Baal Shem Tov's grandson commenting on the words, Darosh Darash Moshe, in Leviticus 11, where it says, Kan Chatzi Otiyot Shebat Torah. This is halfway through the Torah. Yes, he says, Moses and all his descendants have to drash, they need to interpret, because without them the text is only half a Torah. But of course this understanding of Fishbane's is already redolent with Rosenzweig and Buber as Torah readers. Fishbane's notion of the Pshat has evolved significantly since that original article. In Fragile Finitude, it is the wholeness of life as experienced by the individual. It is extending far beyond the wholeness of the text. But these are parallel to one another. Creation and revelation. God creates the world, including the reader, and reveals the text in parallel fashion. Aseret HaDibrot Keneged Asara Ma'amarot. The 10 Commandments, contained in all of Torah, are parallel to the 10 words by which God created the world. Creation is itself a divine self-revelation, as is Torah, word or language, which is to say, the human ability to search for meaning. The centrality of the meeting between them is still there. But in Fishbane's more mature theological work, the Pshat has essentially become the reality of life, including our setting both in the natural and human realms that stand prior to the text as we encounter it. But it is the conclusion of that 1975 article where you really see Fishbane as we know him today, already in formation. Again, I quote, "But it is just here that a profound and mysterious counter-movement in Sod is disclosed. It is a movement that lies at the deepest soul of interpretation and seeks to transcend the text itself. The mystical sphere of Sod involves the ultimate restoration of the infinity of meanings back to God, back beyond the words of human discourse and time, back to the source of potencies from which words and meanings arise. The ultimate task of interpretation and teaching is thus revealed as a sacred task, to transcend the idolatries of language. To transcend the idolatries of language. It is a task which reveals both the tenuousness of words and their power. It is a task which reveals God's presence through his words, and in the multiplicity of interpretations, reveals the diversity of God's presence in human experience. It is in this spirit that the Midrash and the Song of Songs interpreted, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his lips," to refer to the continuity of revelation, the kiss of God, when a person interprets Torah in the moments of his life. The silence of the Pshat, ineffable, without an interpreter to vocalize it, is here restored. The still small voice. Rabbi Nachman, shtok, kach aleva machshava. Only with silence can you enter into the mind of God. I imagine that this audience is composed primarily of regular Fishbane readers. I'm certain each of us has a favorite work, chapter, or article that we readily call to mind. How could it not be the kiss of God, or fragile finitude, or something else? Only you can know what that is. For this reader, Fishbane's magnum opus is his magnificent commentary on the Song of Songs, published in the Jewish Publication Society series. Hence, I'd like to devote a bit of time to it. First, I want to stand and know before the sheer chutzpah of writing the first fourfold commentary on Scripture since when? The 15th century, the 16th? Think of the boldness of this as a statement of postmodernity, especially in the Jewish world, where serious biblical scholarship of any sort since the early 19th century has been strictly limited to the Pshat, and Rashi was dismissed as, that's merely rabbi sermons. There is something earth-shaking about it. Indeed, several years prior to its appearance, the Orthodox publishing house Art Scroll had released its own so-called translation of the Song of Songs, read entirely in the Midrashic tradition, "Thy two breasts, these are Moses and Aaron," or "the two tablets of the law," etc., with special care to delete any possible sexual references. Quite a feat in the canticle, Bernie will agree. It was deservedly treated as a laughingstock across most of the Jewish community. But now along comes Fishbane, bearing scholarly credentials of high repute, seeking to offer a legitimized midrashic reading of the song. My bein hai lahai. How do we distinguish between them? And what are readers to think? Here we see Fishbane the archaeologist doing his finest work. He wants to get down to the deepest level of meaning, excavated down to the sub-basement of his Jungian house. But wait a minute. What is the sub-basement? Is it the Pshat or the Sod? If we're seeking the deepest, most obscure literal meaning of the text, don't we have to dig down into the long-forgotten Mesopotamian parallels, both linguistic and literary? Only that way will the text make any sense. There what lies, we might say, at the bottom of things. Fishbane can do that, of course, and does so frequently. But he also has another sub-basement in mind. That is the deepest inner meaning of the text. It is the text one calls forth mima'amakim de profundis, following the Zohar's reading of Psalm 133:1. Out of the depths I call to you, not the depths of my despair, but the depths of divine hiding. I call you forth from the hiddenness, from the depths of your hiddenness. In order to get there, he needs to equip himself with tools that are the gift of a long tradition, the freedom to creatively, even audaciously, reread, supplied by Drash, the theological profundity added by Remes, and perhaps most significantly, the new and rich symbolic language created by the Kabbalists, called Sod. It is with these tools in hand that he turns toward a second sort of digging, always very carefully, like a good archaeologist, reaching in toward the deepest Sod. It is the esoteric meaning that lies at the bottom, the deepest level of the house. But the careful reader will then discover that there is yet another sort of digging taking place here. This commentary is not just the missing Rabbeinu Bachya and Shir HaShirim. It could not have been written in the 13th century. The Sod, and sometimes even the Remes in Fishbane's work, is his own Sod, that which he alone is capable of finding within and turning into words. That is to say, this is a post-Rosenzweigian religious existentialism alongside all the other layers. The commentary is a deeply personal, self-revealing one in which there is sometimes a sense of abandon with which Fishbane exposes his own religious life and language. He does so, of course, with restraint and verbal elegance, as always, but the rawness of emotion is not too hard to find. There is something deeply passionate about the writing of this entire work. But of course, you might say, this is the Song of Songs. How can you write about it without passion? Here I need to digress for a moment to share some reflection on that term, passion. It enters the English language historically, purely in the Christian context. Passio means suffering in Latin, and of course it's taken to refer to the suffering of Christ on the cross. Only after the 16th century does it take on the much broader connotation of intense emotion, what we might call tshukah or cheshek in Hebrew. When I read a remark by Daniel Boyarin saying that in the Midrash, Shmot Rabbah, Shir Hashirim Rabbah, the narrative of Exodus and Sinai was washed over with the Song of Songs, I believe it was I and not he, but if it is, I gave him credit. I said, of course, this converts it into the Jewish passion narrative. Not only as suffering, of course, but in the more extended sense as well. It becomes that in a religious or even mystical sense, meaning that the devotee's inner passion is fully identified with that of coming forth from Egypt, standing at the sea or standing before the mountain. The Chut HaMeshulash, the triple chord of this mighty threesome, the Torah narrative, the erotic canticle, and the inner life of the individual, bears within it the passion or intensity of Jewish religious life, as Fishbane seeks to describe it to us. This insight into the Song of Songs commentary leads me, however, to a broader consideration of passion, or eros, within his oeuvre as a whole. This, however, will require a shift of metaphor. As much as we may have enjoyed exploring the stories of Jung's or Fishbane's inner house, we must now note how parallel they are to a metaphor much more native to the tradition, that of the outer adornments, garments, body, and soul of Torah. The student may be drawn to Torah first by its outermost form, its richness of language, its beautiful narrative style, perhaps even its written form in the scroll before one. The moral teachings and worldly wisdom of Torah may come next, serving as our garments. Yes, the feminine is right here, taken directly out of the pages of the Zohar. The reader is taken to be male, in this case Fishbane fits the bill. When these are stripped away, we get to what are called gufei Torah, the bodies of law and praxis that are demanded by Torah. But the true goal lies beyond these, the inner soul of Torah, Nishmat Torah, the Sod. So we may say, and Mona will forgive us, that Fishbane has spent his entire life undressing the bride over and over again. 2 comments. Yes, this is indeed all about the eros of hermeneutics, a quest to penetrate her, the mysterious text, object of our devotion and affection. What we are after is ultimately not her body, but her soul. This is love-making, not just sex. Some Jewish scholars take note. Second, again we have to ask if we're sure we have the right order. Is it the sod we discover at the core, or the pshat? We'll have to come back to that one. Fishbane is a passionate reader of Jewish sources in the full sense of the word. This would be clear even if he hadn't written about the Song of Songs and the kiss of God. But he's chosen to make it easier for us, something he does not always do for his readers. The eros of reading, much discussed in literary circles from Roland Barthes' The Pleasure of the Text to the contemporary work of Alexander Nahamas, is well demonstrated in him. Nahamas goes back to Plato to uncover the link between interpretation and erotic penetration of the text, the Gan Na'ul, the locked garden of Scripture. Of course, he does it without reference to the Kabbalistic readings that his ancestors probably knew so well. This eroticizing of the hermeneutic process renders it fraught with ultimate meaning, re-imbuing the text with sacred significance, rendering the critical approach to it, which Buzzy so deeply imbibed in his early years, almost trivial. But love, in order to be fulfilling, requires mutuality. Walking out onto the plank of love, saying, I love you, we hope for a confirming response from the other side. So the hermeneutic lover relates to the text seeking its love in return. Her unveiling of herself, again with apologies for the genderization, in response to his probes, is that confirmation. Those of us who spend our lives selecting and interpreting sacred sources are blessed with moments in which we feel chosen by the text we choose to read. They have found us as much as we have found them. For the mystic, of course, the words of Scripture devolve back into the primal word with a capital W in the singular, and that word is none other than the impronounceable name of God, a word that has no consonants but only breath. That word is only love. I read from the Zohar. All is called love, and all exists because of love, as Scripture says. Mighty waters cannot quench love. Everything stands upon love, because such is the holy name. We have established that the upper tip of the yod is never separated from it because it dwells upon it in love. Regarding hey, we know that yud is never separated from it. They are in constant love and are inseparable. Thus yud hey. Of this we have learned the Nahar Yotzei me'Eden, a river flows from Eden in the present tense. It is constantly flowing. They cleave to one another in love. Vav is always the bridegroom of the bride. Yod with hey, hey with vav, vav with hey. That is why all is called love. And one who loves the king becomes bound up in that love. Hence, ve'ahavta et Hashem Elohecha. You will love along with Havaya, your God. The divine name, which is the heart of Scripture, is itself love. In the process of interpreting Scripture, which is that holy name in expanded form, you enter into that love and become fully a part of it. Here we are beyond mutuality, but fully absorbed in the divine love that fills its two creations, the universe and the text. Neither Fishbane nor I would call ourselves Kabbalists. It is even beyond chutzpah to call oneself a mystic. But we are at very least mystical theologians, something we are no longer able to deny. In this we stand in the tradition of Abraham Isaac Cook and Abraham Joshua Heschel, modern theologians deeply influenced by the mystical tradition, but not claimants for its absolute truth. In this we differ, for example, from the various disciples of Yehuda Leib Ashlag, an early 20th century Polish Jew who chose to enter the community of Kabbalists in Jerusalem and give quasi-modern expression to their views, or for that matter from Nadine Steinsaltz, who accepted classical Chabad theology and supplied it with contemporary metaphors. We realize that the mystical and Hasidic versions of Jewish thought lent a depth to the tradition that prior to them was unknown. We longed for this depth, the way the Zohar, as I said earlier, transforms De Profundis to mean, out of the depths of your hiddenness, I call you forth, O Lord. While Fishbane was busy learning Akkadian and Ugaritic in graduate school, I was already listening to Alexander Altman lecture on the points of Zahir and Batin, the outer and inner or surface and esoteric readings of the Quran in medieval Islam that set the stage for what became the Jewish fourfold interpretation of Scripture. The sod Fishbane finds in the text is, as I have said, his own, though he may use readings and especially the symbolic language of the Kabbalists that they created to articulate it. But because Buzzy began his path as a Bible scholar, and also at least equally important, because he's a person very much grounded in this world, a lover of nature and all its concreteness, those walks in the woods, he'll often tell us that the ultimate sod is nothing other than a renewed and transformed return to the Pshat. as we dig into the deepest level, both textually and inwardly, we find ourselves living very much in this concrete universe, transformed by the divine radiance by which it is so filled. I cannot conclude my remarks today without making some reference to the dark and frightening events of this terrible month. I choose to do so by quoting from Fishbane's introduction to Sod in his commentary on the Song of Songs. Quoting, "The song's discourses convey the desire for mystical wisdom by which the seekers, by the seekers themselves. One striking instance comes to expression in a bold reading of 1:5, Shora Nivanava, I am dark but comely, or black and beautiful. The interpreter knows that seekers experience loss and darkness as they yearn for the light of divine truth. At such difficult times, confusion holds sway. One feels dark and lost, even as one is simultaneously aware of a higher dimension of oneself arising from the still beautiful soul. Spiritual coherence has broken down, and the seeker needs help. Hagida Lishavan Ashi, tell me, O beloved of my soul, where do you dwell? Where can the source of wisdom be found? And how may one proceed out of the morass of mental confusion?" This cry issues from Knesset Yisrael, from the collective soul of all Israel, with unique poignancy this month. How do we arise out of the spiritual confusion that envelops us in times of such great pain and loss? Fishbane continues, "The cry of longing and despair is immediately answered. Im lo ted ilach, if you don't know the mysteries and path on your own, lach, go and seek a master." Thank you, dear Buzzy, for having served as such a master and source of wisdom in your writing, in your teaching, and in your friendship for all of us for all these many years. Sad times are good times, so I'm going to add a quick story. A quick story from the old days. Winter 1967-68. Buzzy, Paul Mendes, Flora, and I are sitting having a cup of coffee in the Castle Cafeteria at Brandeis, some of you may remember. We're all first-year graduate students. I look up, and into the cafeteria walks a guy I know, because I had been an undergraduate at Brandeis 6 years earlier. I had Israel and Rabbinical School in between. I get up and I walk over the door and say to him, "Hey, Abby Hoffman, what are you doing here?" And Abby says to me, "Well, I'm coming to get some guys together to cut up the Democratic Convention next summer. What do you think? You want to come?" And I shared Abby's very radical opposition to the war. I was a student of Heschel, who was the national co-chair of Clergy Conservative at Vietnam with Dan Berrigan. And I looked at Abby, and I looked back at Buzzy and Paul, and I looked back and forth, and I said, "I think I'll stay in graduate school. I hope you think I made the right choice."
Thanks to all of you. Are we on to reception now? We are on to the reception. So thanks so much to all of you. Thanks for all the talks. Thanks for Buzzy for being here and your wonderful family. Thanks to Art for your beautiful, inspiring words. Thanks to everyone. And now, please, to the reception.